We're gonna wait a couple more minutes, Chris, see if anybody else shows up, or you want to get started. All right. Technology, ain't it great? Well, hopefully people will still hear your intro on your streaming. If you just want to message in the chat and say when, and I'll get started.
Actually, you know what? On streaming, I bet they can hear me. Yeah, they just can't hear me on Discord.
All right. Well, so today we're going to be talking about chapter 7, and actually a tiny little bit of chapter 8 for the Cosmic Doctrine. That's going to be this book right here, and this version of the book. I think this is the millennial version, or millennium version. And so probably the most important things that Dion Fortune starts talking about in this chapter is it's entitled, where'd it go here? The Evolution of a Great Entity. And this is where we start talking a little bit more about how things, we've talked a lot about very big concepts, uh, the three rings, the ring of creation, the ring of destruction, and then the boundary by which it won't pass. We've talked about the 7 concentric layers uh, that correspond to uh, a bunch of different number 7s that we see in the occult texts. We talked about the 12 different rays, and those are very important to remember in this particular chapter, because what we're going to start talking about is not just these have sort of been the talking about creation in general, so to speak, and now we're starting to actually get to the evolution of the great entity itself. Uh, and Dion Fortune tells us that our great entity exists within the sun, and she refers to it as the Solo Logos. And one of the things that probably the most important thing that she talks about here is that uh, uh, when we start talking about the great entities, uh, they've all been influenced by all of these different events, by the turning of the ring cosmos and the ring chaos, by traveling through the central stillness, through all the different rays, through all the different concentric circles. And so all of those influences exist within the great entity. And she starts telling us to think about things in the sense of all of those things are sort of uh, the nature of the great entity because they've been acted upon it. So it's sort of the same thing when you think about. I always think about it sort of in the sense of animals. If you ever had cats or ferrets, you go into somebody's house and you know because you haven't had one, it's like, oh man, you got a cat in here, but you don't necessarily smell it because it's your it's your normal, right? And so all these things that are affecting the great entity are its normal, right? So it doesn't it's spinning constantly, but it doesn't perceive the spinning. It only sees things uh, when things change. Um, and so uh, all the different uh, uh, the different natures of the thing, the spinning, the turns, the traveling through all the rays, uh, those are the uh, the influences of the greater cosmos, and now the lesser cosmos is also going to have those influences as well. but it's a copy, right? It's not the original, but all those influences are still going to be seen. And so that's why when we start looking at uh, the 12 signs of the zodiac and how they affect uh, people's lives and the changing of things, uh, these are all reflections of greater events that are affecting uh, the great entity. And we can look at, it's again, it's a matter of scale. So we say, okay, well, in a year you pass through all 12 of the zodiac signs, right? And then there's also a bigger scale there as well. That's the great ages of mankind that I think they operate on. If you can remember it all, Chris, what is? But it's over thousands of years where we transition from one cycle of the zodiac to the next. So we were in Pisces back before, I think it was about the 1880s is about when we switched into the new. Oh my God, I can hear you. There you go. Right. Um, but those great turnings of the age are a reflection of the yearly, or I should say the yearly uh, cycle of the zodiac is a reflection of that greater age. And then beyond that, there may even be a greater turning of the ages that we're not aware of because it's just so huge that we can't conceive of it, right? Um, and so what Fortune starts talking to us about here is that let's see here. So one important thing that she mentions in this phase is that uh, movement is consciousness. So it is the process of this movement, and we talked about maybe it was last time or before about how patterns of thought, or just patterns in general get woven into things, and it's really you sort of and again, I always try to equate a lot of this talk to to our own lives as far as we get uh, wrapped up in these patterns of thought or even patterns of action, and until uh, it's not really until something outside of that pattern influences us that will cause a change in the pattern, right? We get so locked in. you know I wake up at 5:30 in the morning every day and I drive to work at 6:30 in the morning, and but then when we have some sort of outside influence in it, that's when that pattern change can change and affect us, and interrupt our pattern so that we have to think about things a little bit differently. And so that's what Fortune's talking about when she's saying that movement is consciousness. Um, is that uh, and and one of the important things that Greer kind of points out in there is that that's not saying uh, that there is no free will, right? That you're just constantly moving on these patterns that have thought out. It's just to say that there's many different types of consciousness, uh, and even these little movements, right, can influence how we do things. Um, and then we start talking about uh, how the different. So again, I think about it, and we're using that solar system metaphor, right? That we, our great entity, is out on the seventh plane of existence, and there are six others, and then the central stillness in the center. The Can you hear me? All right. So again, I think of it in similar terms of our own solar system, right? That we've got planets closer to the sun. If we think that we were the seventh planet out, and we had six other planets in there, uh, there's a couple of things that happen there uh, that are important to think about in terms of how the cosmos affects us, right? And that is that as these, if we're here and the central stillness is in the center, and we have something pass in front of us, right? It blocks the central stillness for a moment, uh, or longer, depending on how quickly and slowly it's moving. When it passes in front of the central stillness, all the things that are on that particular circle feel a pull towards the center, and everything else is sort of pushed away from the center. So if we think about it in terms of the numbers, right? If we're on the seventh and the a great entity on the sixth plane passes in front of us, and remember that surrounding that great entity is not just seventh plane uh, atoms, right? It's all of the atoms, because the great entity traveled through all of the circles, out the other side and back again, and so it's got a whole bunch of atoms of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 7 surrounding it. And so when the 6 passes in front, those atoms that are aligned to the 6 plane are sort of pulled more closely towards the center. And then uh, the rest of it is sort of pushed away. And we'll get into a little more of that in a second here, as we talk about the nature of evil. But they also exert, as they get closer, they exert sort of a gravitational pull as well. And I know that Greer has mentioned before on his blog that whenever there's uh, like a collective, I'm forgetting the name of it. We always use like a collective dissonance within the mentality of humankind. Whenever there's some sort of big cognitive dissonance that occurs, um, it may be because there's something passing between us and the central stillness, because we're not getting that direct line to to the divine at that exact moment. Um, let's see here. Uh, I'm not certain, Brother Philip, on Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. I know that it's the 13th zodiac is not something that I have studied, and so I am not certain what uh, influence, if any, it has. I know that for this book, uh, we only have 12 rays, so there is no hidden 13th ray uh, within Dion Fortune's cosmos. So as for what the nature of the 13th zodiac is, I don't know that's something that Fortune has any information on. It's not something that I've looked into either. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Phil or Chris.
I don't actually, but that does intrigue me in terms of wanting to explore a hidden 13th path, just like the Kabbalah has the hidden Sephiroth. So could there be a hidden zodiac? Something neat to think about. That's usually what
Yeah.
Phil does for us. He gives us interesting things to think about.
Uh, and so again, the we start getting, so as we've been talking about here um, with the great entity, right? This is really where we start talking about as above, so below, right? Because I just said that the great entity itself is a reflection of the cosmos, because it has all of the influences of the ring cosmos, the ring chaos, uh, so the great entity's sphere of influence would be its ring pass not. That and if you, again, thinking about it, boiling it down uh, to our own lives, right? We have our own ring cosmos, ring chaos, and ring pass not. That there are, the things that we have direct control over is sort of the things that we can affect with our ring cosmos, but there is a limit to our influence, right? There's only so far that we can do, and some people have a further one, and some people have a smaller one. Um, but again, as above, so below, and it just keeps going, stepping down, right? So you have the cosmos, and then you've got the great entities, and then you've got, uh, perhaps the Earth itself, and then you've got the individual people. Like I kind of think of it like a Russian nesting doll, right? It's the same thing, but on a smaller scale. Um, and then in the very beginning of chapter 8 is where Dion Fortune really starts talking about positive evil. So we've already talked about the negative evil, which is uh, sort of a natural occurrence by the ring chaos. That it is the inertia, the thrust block of learning. Um,
Which is funny, considering that when you hear the word negative evil, you think that should be, the malicious and malevolent evil, but it's not. It's actually reversed.
right. Um, and the and as Dion Fortune put out, negative evil is necessary for creation to exist. Um, Positive evil is kind of is and isn't. Um, it's not built into the structure of the cosmos itself. However, uh, it will inevitably happen as those other great entities eclipse our own and block the central stillness. Uh, because what happens then is that the entity or the atoms that align with that are pulled more forcibly towards the center, and everything else is tried to be pushed back out towards the ring past not, um, towards the ring chaos there. And so it's not a natural part of the cosmos, but it is a part that inevitably will happen no matter what you do. Um, and then let's see here. So again, one of the things that right, we talked a while back about cycles, right? That you have the ring pass, the ring cosmos, and the ring chaos. The ring chaos is turning, and then as it gets closer, or as it gets further, once it reaches that like equilibrium point, things sort of settle, and then when it finally hits the tipping point again, everything gets stirred up again. And so, in that same way, Dion Fortune is saying that also evil itself, uh, the positive evil, the evil of free-willed beings, is also kind of cyclical, which is kind of unfortunate, really. But it's 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 a discordant stress in the system that happens periodically, and there really isn't anything you can do necessarily to stop it from happening, uh, other than, as if you're paying attention to those things, hopefully you can spot it and more align yourself with the ring cosmos. Um, let's see here. Oh, and then uh, she talks about positive evil taking two forms, um, which she refers to as uh, perverted force and perverted form. And she's not referring to anything sexual there. She just means turned aside from its normal course. Um, and what she sort of, we're going to get into it quite a bit more later on, uh, but it's unbalanced force and unbalanced form. She refers to them as sin and disease. Um, and let's see here. Yeah, so what she says sort of here is that sin and disease, these perverted forces and forms, are again, they're caused uh, by these eclipses, so to speak, and part of uh, the great entity's work, and then also by uh, by association, sort of part of our work is to identify these and work them out as we go through our evolution. Um, let's see here.
And one of the things that chapter 7 talks about also are the 7 planes. I think the 7 planes are good to swing back to, just because they are a key concept that people will talk about a lot and what those mean. And I know we don't have any images to go with what we're talking about here, which kind of makes things more difficult because it's just abstract in our head. But the 7 planes, or the 7, I don't know another word to use for them, the 7 forms that we can assume start down at that, because we're in the 7th plane of evolution, or we're at the farthest reach of our quote unquote solar system is the 7th plane, right? And we're making our way back in. So to put all that together and kind of wrap that up, when we were ejected, or when we were released from the divine, from the light, whatever you want to call it, we fall downward through the 7 planes. And so at our point as human beings, we have reached the bottom part of the descent. So we are at the bottom at the 7th plane. And as we travel down, as we have moved down those planes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we have collected materials and have created what they call shells. And the Kabbalah talks about this as well. And in the Kabbalah, we fall from the divine, and then now we're swinging back up. So the Kabbalah and the cosmic doctrine are linked in those two ways. They just talk about it in different ways. They use different types of vernacular, but it's still the same concept. We've fallen all the way to the bottom, and now we're going to experience coming back up. And so the 7th plane, where we're at now, is the physical plane. And the physical plane represents everything around you. It is conceived by our 5 senses, our very flawed 5 senses. And with the 5 senses that we use to perceive our experiences here on the physical plane, we understand that there are things that we cannot see, and there are things we cannot hear or taste or smell that, say, animals can. So we know there are hidden aspects of the physical plane that we cannot experience. We know that as a scientific fact. And as we rise up through the planes, just as a kind of refresher of what those are, the one above us is the etheric plane. And in the etheric plane, that's closely linked to our physical bodies. And that is where we receive energy and light from the sun. The etheric plane is where, and we're going to get into some little bit more esoteric woo-woo here, but like that's where your elementals all kind of hang out. And above that, we have the astral plane, or the astral sea, or whatever we want to call it. And in the astral, that kind of dictates our emotional state and whatnot. And we have astral bodies that are fully formed, that we're in our evolution, that we can work with. And above that, on the 4th plane, we have what's called the mental plane. And that's where we're just now breaking into the mental plane. And part of what we're doing here is, in theurgy, the concept of theurgy, which is what a lot of what we're dealing with here is developing that mental presence and evolving ourselves more fully into it. Because as like Greer and I almost said Celine Dion Fortune state, we don't have full mental, bodies like we do astral bodies, like we do etheric bodies, like we do physical bodies. So we're working on that. So that's that. And all of these planes have different concepts. And above the mental plane, we have the spiritual plane. And the spiritual plane is where the archangels are said to dwell, and the angels are said to dwell. And above that, we have the causal plane, and above that is the source or the supernal, right? So those are discussed in chapter 7. They kind of they break the astral plane down in like 2 phases or whatnot. But when we adapt that older model to where we are today, those are the 7 planes of existence that we are moving up to now. So we are rising back to the source, God, the supreme architect of the universe, whatever word you want to give to that. We're rising through those planes, and our experiences are why we're here. We're here to experience all of these things and to remember those as we move from incarnation to incarnation, as we're collecting these various experiences. And I just wanted to touch on those 7 planes because they do talk about those in that chapter, and those are keystone parts to esoteric doctrine. So anyway, thank you for letting me interrupt you.
Absolutely, and the probably the most when we start talking about the planes, and we'll get into the planes quite a bit more later on in this book, as we start drilling down into each one a little further. But the first 4 planes, right? So the physical, the etheric, the astral, and the mental are planes that we can experience. But beyond that, the thing I always think about is like the astral and the physical and the etheric is more about the physical body. When you start getting to the astral and the mental, you're dealing more with thought. You're dealing with philosophy and understanding. And when you start getting into the spiritual and the causal planes, that's where you're starting to deal with religion. Like religion is what talks about what's going on those planes, because we can't experience them directly. We can only experience them through metaphor, through and obviously things like the Bible tell us that creatures from those planes, like Chris just said, angels have come down and given us information and given us knowledge and understanding that come from those planes. But again, we can't experience it directly. We're receiving it sort of secondhand from them.
Reflections. We see the reflections of those planes.
Right. And again, that's a very important concept in this particular chapter, is as above, so below. Like we are a reflection sort of the great entity, which is a reflection of possibly an even bigger entity, which is possibly a reflection of the one, and it's I always laugh because I think about the what was the Multiplicity with Michael Keaton. You got a clone of a clone of a clone, right? That you start to lose a little bit of stuff, right? We just don't have the capability yet of really understanding some of those higher concepts. But the whole purpose of occult philosophy is to try and get us closer to that. Brother Philip asks, so are all emotions a reflection of the Creator's feelings? So, who knows?
Maybe.
My personal view of things, because I don't necessarily like the way that, and especially I don't especially like the way now that a lot of the Christian churches talk about God, because they say he's all knowing, he's all powerful, he's all loving, he's all, right? And that's not that's very counter to what Dion Fortune is saying here, because she's saying that God is constantly learning
and evolving.
Evolving,
and that's what we're here. We're here to assist in that.
Right. He's learning through us. Right. Every little bit of information that we learn, all the experiences that we have, the good and the bad, when we finally make it back to the divine, all of what we've experienced will become a part of the divine.
Because we are part of the divine. We are all shards of the divine.
Yep. Good question, Phil.
And then Bill says, we think we're enjoying, but we are being enjoyed.
Is there anything else you think is important to bring up there, Chris, or we're ready to start taking more questions?
We can take some questions. Does anyone have anything they want to talk, or does anyone want to come on stage and ask a question? Test the technology gods and see if your microphone works like I had to do. My camera doesn't work.
Which is weird because it was working just a little while ago.
I know my streaming software has captured the signal, and so I can't get it to work without shutting everything down and restarting it. So. All right, Bill's typing something. I don't have anything on the live stream, so there are no questions there. It looks pretty quiet.
All right.
What we got? Bunch of typing going on. We're going to do this the reading way. Yeah, so while they're typing this, can you show the book real quick again? This is the Cosmic Doctrine, because we didn't have a good introduction to this video. We just kind of went into it. Cosmic Doctrine by Dion Fortune. Again, one of the cornerstone works of the 20th century in modern esotericism, which is why we've chosen to cover it. There are probably easier sources of information to pull this information from, but maybe I'm a masochist, but I got a lot out of this book. It is harder because it makes you think more, but I think by having to think more about it, you get more mileage out of it than by having it explained directly to you. Let's see, Bill. Is it only humanity that goes through the planes, or all living things? Oh, well, that depends on who you talk to. I know that David will have. Go ahead. Give Mr. Greer's.
Well, not just Greer, but that's also Dion Fortune's view here. Is that so? Sure. The idea is that no, all living things are going through the planes. That includes plants. That includes animals.
Minerals.
Minerals. It includes everything. So the idea is, and again, this is we're jumping way ahead here, but that's okay. Is that when we went through the planes, right? So as Chris said, we started in the divine, and then we sort of fell through all the 7 planes of existence to the very bottom. And once at the bottom, then we had to create bodies for ourselves. So you started out as solid matter, and over time you built up an etheric sheath, a sheath of life energy, and that's what crystals are. So crystals are physical matter that has an etheric sheath, which is why they're more energetic than just a regular rock. And once you had finally developed an etheric body, you would graduate to the plant realm. And then life after life, death after death of a plant, you would start to develop an astral sheath. And once you develop an astral sheath, you would become a tree. That's why trees are more, trees dream, right? They're very rudimentary. But the trees are the more advanced stage of the plant life. And once you developed an astral body, astral body, then you graduated to the animal stage. And so all those, and it's not just humans. It's believed that potentially some whales and porpoises may also be sort of at a similar stage that we are, evolutionarily soul speaking. But most animals then are in the process of developing that. So they're processing their astral body, and they're trying to develop a mental sheath. Once you develop a mental sheath, that's when you're ready for the human stage of your existence. And so that's actually what It's funny. I always think about what's the meaning of life? Like, what's the purpose of life? Well, it's actually, according to Dion Fortune and a number of others here, it's actually to develop that mental sheath. Because once you create a mental body, you're going to graduate to the next level,
Right.
spiritual evolution,
Right.
where you don't need a physical body anymore.
Which is the point of why we're all sitting here right now. That's what theurgy's point is to advance yourself to that mental body. I did post a picture, a very crude, ugly picture. I have a prettier one. I just can't find it right now. Falling through the seven planes and re-rising. This actually, I first saw this in a Kabbalah class, and then I want to say it was Greer actually has a picture of something like this. But this also gets into what's called the left-hand path, and that is getting ahead of the book as well. But if you notice on the left-hand side, we're descending, and on the right-hand side, we're going up. But if you notice, at the very top is still the source, right? So it's not drawn, but at the top, think of there as being a white light. That's the source. And you have the ability to go backwards up through to the light again. That's called the left-hand path, and that's a destructive path because you're going backwards. That's all I'll say about that at this time, but I thought I'd point that out as well. But yes, the whole mental sheath thing, we're here to develop that mental body, and that's meditation gets you into the mental realm. That's why, well, we had some good experiences this week in the lodge, which was surprising to see that being brought in, and I'm happy it was. Meditation gets you closer to that, and through gnosis and knowledge, we're able to develop the
Yeah, and
entire part.
I'll say one thing, and then I'll talk for a brief second about meditation there. But just going back to Bill's question, then is so all the animals that you encounter, right, are on the same path that we are. They're just not at our stage yet. And you can affect the spiritual evolution of those creatures, right? By treating them well, by treating them with the respect that a living creature deserves. And so if you have any pets, I always think about I have 2 dogs, 2 cats, that I hope that I am helping them spiritually evolve by giving them a good life. And so it's one of the things I feel like Dion Fortune's view really teaches is a respect for all living things, which isn't to say that you shouldn't eat meat or anything like that, but it's just to make sure that you have that respectful view of what's happening. And then to talk about meditation there, I know that John Michael Greer believes that meditation is probably the most important thing you could possibly do in your lifetime. And the thing that I always talk to people about when they say meditation, right? There's 2 types of meditation. There's the Eastern meditation, which is all about emptying your mind, and then there's Western meditation, which is about thinking about things. And part of the problem with a lot of I'm gonna say a lot of the like flavor of the month sort of, and this happened for a while too. It's not just now. But there were a lot of people that went over and saw like Eastern meditation, like, oh, we need to bring this to the West. And it's like, well, the problem is if you're not doing all of the things that they teach you in the East, taking one piece of it's not going to help you do anything. In fact, it's probably going to confuse you.
Mm-hmm. That's like mixing.
So if you're
don't mix the traditions.
Right. So if you're not following Buddhism and all the tenets thereof, what Eastern meditation is not really going to do much for you. And again, if you think about it, meditation is a Latin word. What does it mean, right? If we say that somebody committed premeditated murder, that doesn't mean that they emptied their mind, right? It means that they thought about it. And so what meditation is designed to do is to help you. John Michael Greer has a specific type that he calls discursive meditation, where you do breathing exercises to sort of calm your mind and push out the other things in your life that are pulling on your mind. And then what you do is you think about something very deeply from all angles. This is actually something that the Catholic Church taught for a very long time, up until like the 1800s. Somewhere in the 1800s, they stopped doing it. But you would, for like a Bible meditation, is that you would read one line in the Bible and then you would meditate on it and meditate. Okay, what does this mean? What's the hidden meaning? How does this apply to my life? How does this apply to my family's life? How does this apply to my job? How do you think about it from every possible angle that you can think of, and that's what Western meditation is really about.
Then we have Catherine, my daughter. She says, I found talking about how we are here to experience very interesting. I was thinking about it very deeply recently and came to a realization that it feels like I was trying too hard to assign meaning to everything, and that maybe the point really is to experience and be a human. It's a rabbit hole, because especially once you start getting into like gematria, and all the coded meanings of everything. I don't know. I feel like it's a fine line. Like everything around you, once you start looking at the numeric codes for everything, you start to look at trees and trying to find its mathematical value and what it equates to, and that leaves the question. Like, so, we have a certain brother at the lodge. Some things just are. There's no hidden meaning to them. They just are, and then other things may have a hidden meaning to them, and it's fun to think about, for sure.
One thing I always think about when we're talking about to experience and be a human, right, is that the divine, the karma, I mean, however you want to look at it, will put things in your path when you're ready for them. One of the big things, again, I say John Michael Greer's name a lot, but one of the big things that he mentions is that if you find yourself running into the same problem, whether it's a relationship problem, whether it's a problem at the job, or dealing with a particular individual or type of individual, if you find yourself running into the same situations all the time, that's karma trying to tell you, hey, there's something you need to learn here and you haven't learned it yet. So
Right.
until you change your mindset, until you change your actions, until you change something and learn the lesson that life's putting before you, you're going to keep running into it. And if you keep running into it until the end of your life, you're going to run into it into your next life. And so it's very important. You don't need to think too hard about, well, like, what's my purpose in life necessarily. But do know that life's going to put lessons in front of you and wants you to learn them, and the more completely you learn them, the faster you're going to move on to bigger and better things.
Very, very true. Yep. Yep. Especially the repetitive part. If you repeat, it's like slamming your head into the wall over and over again. You have to learn that lesson. Sometimes it's going to be
Right.
painful, but that's the point. And that's where the way you approach problems is important. You can lament those problems and complain about those problems and all that stuff, or you can be like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to grow and overcome this. And it seems that once you've accepted that, it doesn't mean challenges and problems go away, but how you accept those problems greatly affects the direction in which you move and consume those problems and grow beyond them.
And one thing you'll also see is that when you've learned the lesson, life will usually throw it at you time just to see, did you really learn the lesson? Are you really going to change how you do things? And usually that's the point at which, okay, if you pass that test, you're done with that lesson completely. You can move on to the next one.
For sure. We have anything more? I see some more typing. Martinist doctrine focuses on the heart of Christ.
Well, we've got Ethan. Do you believe that there is a single lexicon that is able to perceive all of these planes in each individual?
I did miss that one up here. Yep. Do you believe? Yep.
Um,
All of the planes in an individual. Hmm.
and I'm not entirely certain what you mean by lexicon there. Um, but as far as perceiving the planes in individuals, uh, the so the seed, right, for the different planes exists within all of us, for all seven of them. But as far as the bodies go, we only have a physical body, an etheric body, an astral body, and we don't quite have a mental body yet. So when you're talking about perceptions, right, there are people that can see auras, there are people that can see etheric energy, um, because you have bodies of those, and you actually do have sense organs that you can learn to use to feel or see or hear, or whatever the various senses are, uh, those different bodies. But as far as like beyond the mental plane, I don't know that you can necessarily uh, see those. I don't know that you can actually see anything or perceive anything beyond those, because we don't have a body that has sense organs of that level yet.
Kabbalah teaches us that we can't. There are there are 5 worlds of Kabbalah. There's 4 that they tell you about, and then there's the hidden world of Adam Kadmon. But the upper worlds, we can't experience directly. We experience them through reflections. So you see the reflections of the upper uh, spiritual realms, and you make of those what you can. So some people will argue that you can see those reflections through meditation. Others say that the only thing you can experience through meditation is development of that mental body and into that realm. Of course, who knows? Who knows? The experience is going to be individual to the person on what they're feeling and experiencing, etc. But let's see. Modern psychology is the same. What I do every day is presenting people with their own problems with the intent to change patterns. Yep. Because that's usually what people are stuck in. Their ruts. I know that's been true for me. What about lives ending young, meaning as children? They had no chance to learn. Hard question, I know. Well, sure they did. The experience was dying young. Yep.
And a lot of that comes back to karma. And I'll say a couple of very important things about karma here. Is that so karma is not good or bad. It is simply the consequences of your actions and thoughts. So when you think about uh, right, positive, we were talking about positive evil, right? If you do evil things, if you hurt other people, well, you're gathering the karma of needing to. That's a lesson that you need to learn at that point. And so you may find yourself incarnated into situations where you are abused or you die young or what have you, because those are lessons that your soul needs to learn because of things that you did in a past life. Now, the important part here is that you can't just say, "Oh, well, that kid died young; he deserved it," right? That's not what we're saying here, because it may be that maybe that abused child is being abused because in his past life he abused children, but maybe it's you as an individual seeing that hurt and doing something about it that actually is what teaches him to learn that lesson, right? So what you do definitely matters, and you can't just chalk it up to, oh well, it's karma. But why do good things happen to bad people, and why do bad things happen to good people? It's because of their past life experiences.
And another, so I've past year's been a Dion Fortune and John Michael Greer extravaganza for me. I've been reading all their books. One of her books is called Through the Gates of Death, which I just put in the chat. It's a very small book. I recommend you pick it up. It's her view. It's an esoteric view on what happens when you die. Well, one of the things she talks about are children, babies, that they die right away. And why is that? And in some cases, and this is coming from her, but when we die suddenly and we're not expecting it, we haven't had a chance to yet to shake off. There's a system or a process that our bodies go through when we die. Like our physical bodies die, then the etheric body starts to decompose. For example, sunlight is supposed to dissolve etheric energy, so that's why, like in a funerary room, they have the drapes closed because it helps the person who died, their spirit. It helps. They need to linger for a little bit because they're in the process of disconnecting from their body, as opposed if you rip open the curtains, the sunlight just dissolves them and they're thrown into this purgatory thing in the astral. But anyhow, if you die suddenly, according to her in this book, or one of the scenarios in this book, and you haven't had a chance to do all those decoupling from that experience, the spirit will seek another form to conclude that death process. So, and it's one of the explanations for, like, if you have a baby who dies stillborn or whatever, that could be what that is. That person found that body and finished the death process in that physical body. Or if you have children that are born and you look at them, the baby, when you look at them in their eyes and you see, and it looks like you're looking at like Yoda, like someone who's been around for hundreds of years is looking back at you, and then they die. That's supposedly that type of situation. But it's another thing to think about. And again, it's from Dion Fortune, and why I linked that in here is because we're talking about one of her books. So this is from the same author. It's an interesting book to look at, and again, it's not very long at all. I read it in like a day and a half. But it's her concept of what happens when we die. So it's recommended reading. Ethan, I guess the lexicon, I guess you would call it a unity point where they all unite. So, yeah. That goes back to, can you experience all the seven realms? I don't think we can at this point in our evolution. Something else to note, though, like archangels, angels, etc., those are supposedly swarms that came before us and are at a higher state of evolution and are at a simpler state of evolution, meaning they're very one-purpose, one-dimensional type entities. They have a job or they have a role and they do it. Whereas we haven't talked about swarms yet. We will. Our swarm we will make up what's known as the fourth swarm, and we will have more of a presence or more of a free will. We're like the first set of souls that have free will and can do things. So that's something interesting to think about compared to angels, who are at this stage more powerful than we are, but whom we will be eventually taking our place alongside with more flexibility. I don't know, for lack of a better word.
Brother Phil asks, what about children who suffer from night terror, schizophrenia, maybe a traumatic death, past life? That's very possible, Phil. I know that John Michael Greer has some memories of his past lives, and his most recent past life, he died in a car crash, and he said that when he was little, he didn't like riding in cars. I know that me personally, I have a fear of heights, and I wonder, does that harken back to something in a past life? I have no idea, but it feels like it makes a certain kind of sense.
I have an unnatural fear of fire, and I think that's because I was on the wrong side of the church a few times.
You might have been burned at the stake there, buddy.
Exactly. Let's see, Phil gave us a picture of a book, The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary, so more recommended reading. Excellent. Dion Fortune claimed at the start of the book that this was channeled to her. This is always in the back of my mind through the lessons. Yeah, channeling's always an interesting source, and part of going through one of the things I like to do, and I posted this in our Discord. I kind of gave the Western esoteric family tree. It showed the line of how things have evolved to where they are today. I try to go up as close to the source as possible, because today, anyway, a lot of our modern writings are just essentially rehashing things that were have other people have talked about. Essentially, I think the last real original synthesis of this movement was the Golden Dawn back in 1888 or 1887 or whatever it was. And then since then, it's just, it broke off and did a lot of offshoots, and they took those writings, but they're presenting it the same material in different ways. When we get to channeling, there are I actually have a lot of books from people who said they channeled things, and I'm always leery of those. Not saying that they're all false, obviously, who knows, but some of them, like, for example, you might hear the emerald tablets, as in plural, the emerald tablets. The emerald tablets was something I was fascinated with until I discovered its origin, and then I was very disappointed. So there was a guy named Dr. Doriel, who wasn't even a real doctor, back in the early 1900s, and he claimed to have channeled the spirit of Thoth, who showed him all of this mystical, these emerald tablets, in addition to the actual emerald tablet we know about. Well, it turns out he also ripped off H.P. Lovecraft and Call of Cthulhu and a bunch of other things, and he was just basically a shyster. But a lot of people if you follow any esoteric groups, that work constantly comes up as something you have to read, and it's so amazing. And then you just go, man, because you know better than that. Like, the guy was a shyster, but people will take that for, as gospel. So you have to be careful with that. And there's a whole... we don't need to bog our discussion down here on channeling itself and how you have to be careful with that, because channeling is not everything is truthful out there. Some things they just like to screw with you and and tell you a story that you'll run with, and other times you might not even be talking to something real. Could be something that you're making up as well. So just keep those in the back of your head when it comes to that word, channeling.
Yeah, the thing that I always think about, and I know that because actually one of the Masons at the lodge, when I showed him Dion Fortune's book, he was like, channeling, I don't want anything to do with this book. Because I know because he's a theosophist, and I know that Blavatsky was very big on talking about the dangers of channeling, because she was around during the spiritualist movement,
Right.
which was all about the seances and talking to the dead, and actually reading Dion Fortune's book about death kind of tells you a little bit more. And actually, I think we get into a little bit in the Cosmic Doctrine, as far as what happens when you die. But I always look at a couple of things. One is, who do they claim they're talking to? And then, is the person that they claim they're talking to even remotely like what we actually know about that person, right? If they say, well, I'm channeling Jesus, and Jesus is telling me that you need to go kill this person, well, it's like, I don't think you're channeling Jesus. I think you're out of your mind. And so you always got to take that with a little bit of grain of salt, and look at, does, not just who do they say they're channeling from, but as Chris said, does this person have a history of ripping other people off or being a con person? And what's the nature of the message, right? Is the message consistent with what we would expect if they say they're channeling Jesus and they're talking about giving to the poor and feeding people, and they're actually doing the things that they're talking about? Well, are they talking to Jesus? Does it matter at that point, right? If their message is truthful and right, what does it matter where that information came from? Is sort of how I look at it.
Yep, and I've got a few books, like I said, in my personal library they're channeled. There's one, it's a collection you can get. It's a bunch of people that channeled this entity called Ra, and they talk about different things. It's fascinating information. There's a group I discovered in Sedona. They put out a book, or he put out a book called Yadhe Vadhe. It's the hidden book of or the hidden keys of Enoch, or something like that. And again, it's something that he channeled, quote unquote, or it was given to him. Is it real? Is it not real? It's hard to say, because you're going to go down a bunch of tunnels, and ultimately these are glimpses of either madness or genius or both that people have seen through reflection or through what they consider was given to them. And in some cases, it is just them making stuff up to make a buck. So, and Phil has a great that comment in there. The seeker after truth must have a care he is not deceived. And the astral. So, if when you meditate, if as you go out into the astral, they call the astral the house of illusions for a reason. And in the Kabbalah, Yesod is your foundation sphere, and you have to be careful. And I think I've said it in this before. There's a scene in the first Harry Potter book or the movie, depending on if you've watched it, where Harry gets stuck staring in a mirror, and that mirror is showing him things he wants to see, and he just comes up to that mirror every night because he wants to see his dead parents, basically, right? And then one day it's gone, and he's just distraught because this mirror is gone, and Dumbledore's there, and he says, "You will not ever look. You'll never find the mirror again. I've made sure of it because you'd basically take your life and waste it staring into this mirror at these things that aren't real. It's an illusion, and it may be something you really want, but you can't be stuck staring at these illusions. So you have to be very careful when you venture into those realms because." Sometimes it's hard to tell what's real and what's not real, and what's truth from fiction.
Another really good point that Phil brings up here that I also think about when looking at channeling is, right. He says all men wish to possess knowledge, but few are willing to pay the price. Is the information that you're giving, is it just being spoon fed to you, or do they want you to think about what's happening? Do they want you to analyze and philosophize about the information that's given to you? Do they want to make you work for that knowledge? This book,
either one
makes you work for that knowledge. It's not spoon fed to you. And so I feel like that's another point in Dion Fortune's favor, that she's not just spoon feeding you information. Like this is definitely an occult philosophy book that she wants you to really think about things and come to your own conclusions.
You'll read it several times in your life, or you're supposed to, for sure. There is that boundary line between the more modern books that spoon feed it to you and those that don't. And I think there's a balance you have to strike between those two things. Another important piece is the pay the price. Everything that you do has a price. Every choice you make has a reaction, and everything you do esoterically has a price. Even if it seems that you're helping something, there is still a price to pay for it somewhere down the line. So you always have to be willing to pay the price for what you have, which is why it's not something that is just like a parlor trick that you use. You know what I mean? It's not like you know this stuff and you just play with it and it's just a toy. Because every time you muck with it, there's a price that you have to pay for it. So you have to be sure that you're ready to pay for that the use of that. Channeling can sometimes be seen as imaginary peer review. Yeah, it can. All right. Do we have anything else that we want to discuss before we call it for the night? All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream. For those of you all who have been watching, thank you for tuning in. Afterwards, we're going to have our usual get together. Maybe my camera will work. We'll see. But I'm going to go ahead and cut the live stream now, and then we will wrap up.